So for the final portion of today's program, I'd like to welcome back Bob, and joining him on stage is Senator Ben Cardin. Senator Cardin, a Democrat from Maryland, is the leading sponsor of the Democracy Restoration Act, which seeks to restore voting rights for former felons. Bob, over to you.
Thanks, Jack. Senator, thanks for joining us this morning. I first want to ask you about, you have legislation that would restore voting rights for ex-felons. Can you tell us a little bit about this bill, and do you think it can possibly move in this Congress?
Bob, first of all, it's good to be here. Thank you very much for putting this on. This is Black History Month. 1 out of every 13 African Americans are disenfranchised in this country. 6 million people are disenfranchised. I think this is the right time to pass this legislation. The House is moving on H.R. 1, which includes this democracy restoration. The bill is pretty simple. Once you've paid your penalty, once you have given your sentence, you've served it, you've been released from prison, you should be able to vote. And that's what the bill does. So it restores voting privileges for those that are no longer incarcerated, or those who are incarcerated for less than a felony, so that they have the opportunity to vote. I think Americans would be surprised to learn that 34 states deny their citizens the rights to vote under those circumstances, and 10 permanently disenfranchise those that have been incarcerated. So yes, I think this is the right time to do it, and I think the attention that the House is playing right now on H.R. 1 will help.
What is the effect on people who get out of prison but yet can't vote?
Well, there's been studies done, and that it shows that those that are released, those returning citizens that participate in a civic way, including voting, are much less likely for recidivism. So the question is, do you want people to have a second chance? I don't think there's a person in this audience who hasn't had a second chance. I know there's not been a member of the United States Senate who hasn't had a second chance. So to deny those who have paid their penalty the right to participate in our society means that they're isolated and are more likely to participate in crime.
Criminal justice reform was passed in large part because of bipartisanship. Have you talked to Republicans about getting on this bill, and do you think you could get GOP support?
Yes, we have talked to Republicans. We have reached out. Rand Paul has filed his own legislation in regards to democracy restoration. There has been conversations with Republican members of the Judiciary Committee in regards to this legislation. So yes, we know there's interest. There's some disagreement. There are some who say, well, maybe we should restore it, as you know, we had the second chance that dealt with certain types of criminal activities. So there are those who want to restrict what the democracy restoration type crimes would qualify. I disagree with that. I think it should apply to anyone who's paid their penalty. That's what the criminal justice system did. They delved out the penalty. You paid that price. You're now released from prison. You should be able to vote. There's also a question as to whether it should apply to those that are on probation or parole. I think it should. The Florida statute that was enacted exempted certain crimes and did not apply when people were still on parole and probation. So we had these different disagreements as to how comprehensive the legislation should be, but that's how the legislative process works. And for First Step, it worked well. So I hope we can find the same thing for democracy restoration. It probably won't be everything I want, but hopefully we can get some legislation enacted in this Congress.
Do you think there's an election upcoming in 2020, and there are a fair amount of your colleagues who are running. Most of them are co-sponsors of your bill. Do you think you can use, I didn't see Senator Klobuchar, so maybe you want to chat with her about whether she's going to get on board, but do you think you can use the 2020 spotlight to push people to push this issue?
I hope so, yes. 2020, of course, is the presidential year. It's the spotlight really is on federal elections. I think, again, voters are probably surprised to find out that almost all of our voter laws are state laws. So how you participate in elections are very much determined by the state. What we're doing now that we have the 2020 elections, there's so much interest in the presidential election that we do. The Congress has control over federal elections, so we can set up our standards. And if we do allow for returning citizens to vote, it's very likely the states would follow suit in doing that. It's interesting that when you look at the differences among states, and you're now looking at what's going to happen in 2020, you recognize that some states that don't have early voting, or some states that have imposed certain restrictions on registration rules like identification laws, that those states are going to be very much in the spotlight as to whether they're trying to discourage people from voting. So I do think that's going to be an issue in the 2020 election, and democracy restoration, allowing returning citizens the right to vote, will certainly be one of those issues.
What about the new Attorney General? Do you think there's a better chance for this to move as opposed to under Jeff Sessions or Matthew Whitaker?
I think Mr. Barr, who has a long experience within the Justice Department, recognizes the importance of the right to vote. It's a fundamental principle of democracy, the right to vote. And yet we deny so many citizens the right to participate in our system. It goes beyond just democracy restoration. We've done this through making it difficult for people to register or people to participate. And certainly the classic example where we denied people the right to vote are the residents of the District of Columbia having full representation in Congress. So yes, I do think with the new leadership in the Justice Department, if they really want to reflect on America's democracy, the Justice Department being the premier organization to enforce our laws, that the right to vote is the fundamental right of a democracy.
Criminal justice reform, that was something that was very close to not happening, but it happened. Why did it happen in such a tough political climate?
Well, that's a great question, Bob. It really is a good question. I think it starts with the fact that there was fundamental support in the Congress to do something about this, both Democrats and Republicans. We had strong leadership in the Congress to move this along. And yes, it was extremely helpful to have the support of the President of the United States and the Trump administration. So this was very much a way that shows that when you work together, you can get things accomplished. It's also an acknowledgement by both Democrats and Republicans that our criminal justice system is broken in this country. It's not working the way it should, and that we have a responsibility to help fix it. And this sentencing change was clearly, it's been an evolutionary process. Congress first dealt with the disparity in the sentencing on drug laws, the crack cocaine issue. We did not take the full step. We only took a partial step. It's the same thing with First Step. We have not fixed the criminal justice system. We've taken a step. And that's how the Congress usually works. We usually don't operate with radical change. And that's why I think on democracy restoration, it is very possible we could reach a compromise. It won't be everything I want. And we hope that in this Congress that there will be a desire with the new Attorney General, with President Trump being unpredictable. I think we all agree with that. This might be a Congress that we could get this done.
We have a couple of minutes left. We can open up for questions if you can wait for the mic to get to you and just identify yourself.
I'm Hassan Bashir with Just Leadership USA. If the Democracy Restoration Act passes, would you be in favor for legislation that allowed people while they're incarcerated to vote, like in Vermont and Maine, since incarceration does not necessarily strip someone of their citizenship?
The answer to that question is yes for non-felony convictions. I believe everyone should have the right to vote, but I think we have to be realistic and recognize that in regards to felony convictions, that we're not at the point where it would be realistic to try to restore voting rights for those who are incarcerated for felony convictions.
Hi, Senator Cardin. Leon Peace, Sulphur Spring. My question is, how about using the crime bill as the legislative strategy template for future legislation in terms of how to work with the White House? Would it be a good template and model for, say, tax legislation to get, in terms of building support to make something, to have successful legislation with the White House?
I love your question. I wish there was a template for working with this president. I don't think any will work. I really don't. We're looking for it. Maybe you're right. Maybe this is the right formula. We know that we tried that with immigration reform. It did not work with this administration. We really did have a bipartisan effort and a bipartisan guardrails as to what we could do and we could not do, and that just didn't work. So I think we have to be realistic to recognize that President Trump doesn't fit into a template easily.
And do you think that, do you think other stuff could get done? I mean, he has expressed support for infrastructure reform and drug pricing.
Yes, absolutely. And drug pricing, there's a hearing today in the Senate Finance Committee on drug pricing, and infrastructure is an area where we do think we can make significant progress. We think the criminal justice system is one area where we can make progress with the Trump administration. We showed that with the first step. So we do think this is an area where a template can work. And yes, you have to work with Republicans and Democrats. You have to have a realistic bill that fits within certain parameters that won't be everything clearly that I want, that's for sure. And you have to engage the White House at a relatively early stage to make sure that we have their support, and we know the players in the White House who can help us in that regard.
We've run out of time. Please thank Senator Cardin for joining us. I'll hand it back to Jack.